Hi there. Welcome, Black. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. As you can see, the title of this video was all about cancel culture. I'm going to be talking about, what kind of people actually get canceled. I'm going to be talking about what cancel culture is and just various topics like that. Please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Go ahead and like this video. Check out my other videos. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified when I post my video. Stay tuned for this video because I'm going to be having really dope guest speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the intro and we're going to get right into it. So what is cancel culture? I feel like a lot of us, have a general understanding, but I want to read like a Google definition so we can get a clear ground for what exactly I'm going to be talking about in this video. So according to Google, cancel culture or call-out culture is a modern form of ostracism in which someone is thrust out of social or professional circles, either online, on social media, in the real world, or both. Those who are subject to this ostracism are said to be canceled. So this is a Google definition. I would say it's pretty accurate. Now, I usually get into the historical context in my videos, but to be honest, cancel culture is a relatively new phenomenon in the way that it exists today. And I would say that a big part of that is because of social media. One thing that social media is able to do in terms of contributing to cancel culture or call out culture is that a bunch of people who have similar opinions are able to connect and talk, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blogs, whatever. Or if something becomes a trending topic, then it might be easier for the news to pick it up or something. And I believe that that is why cancel culture is something that has kind of happened in the more recent years as social media has more become the giant that it is today. That's not to say that back in the day people didn't get canceled, but back in the day, especially for Black folks, a lot of times if there was a large narrative that was being said about somebody, usually sometimes people would think well, maybe they're just trying to take that person down. Maybe, this is secretly a rumor that, and which would very, very much happen. A lot of times there would be maybe rumors that would spread about people just to kind of get them down. And also back in the day, there wasn't necessarily such a strong social media presence. So even if someone did personally have an experience or see something, they might tell people in their town or they might tell people that they were close to, even if they did that. But it wouldn't necessarily be okay, well, I'm going to tweet about it and it's going to blow up necessarily. So there might have been a lot of people who knew Rick James, for example, who were he actually has a sex slave. Him and his wife, they do a whole sex slave and they have her locked up or whatever. But again, if that only a couple people knew that, then how was the world supposed to find out that? And you might hear something like that and think, well, that's probably not true. Somebody's just probably trying to make a rumor about him to bring the Black person down, which, like I said, would happen. But Rick James actually did have a sex slave, so that's interesting. But yeah, and all that to say, the historical context for cancel culture is relatively new, and I think that's why personally there's a lot of people, I'm interested in cancel culture, but I think there's a lot of people who are very interested in talking about cancel culture because we've been able to really see it in today's society in more recent years as social media has become bigger. And I'm going to get into a little bit of that next, but just wanted to bring that in, that because this is a relatively new idea within the past maybe 10 years, probably 5 years low key, of people really being canceled truly. I think that's why, there's not as much knowledge around this in terms of the historical context. So now we're gonna get into the problem or the issue that I have, and I think that a lot of people have with cancel culture. Now, the issue that I have is I think that people oftentimes confuse call-out culture with cancel culture. I think that call-out culture is essentially just, someone trending on Twitter because they said something or did something that's controversial or, that sparks a lot of opinions. And I do think that call-out culture can lead to cancel culture, or calling someone out can lead to someone being canceled. But I think that a lot of people are called out, but they're not necessarily canceled. And there's a lot of people who are called out and have been canceled for good reason, in my opinion. So when I'm thinking of people that are called out who actually have been canceled, I'm thinking of, killers, predators, rapists. I'm thinking of probably a Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, R. Kelly, people that have come out in wild numbers saying, hey, this person, sexually assaulted me, this person, whatever. And there's other people who are also saying that, and, stories and people seeing things and whatever. For those three men that I listed, I mean, their shows aren't really being played anymore, music being stripped from streaming platforms, movies now, production companies falling through, like various things like that. And some of these men, I think all of them, most of them are in jail. Of the three men I listed, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, and R. Kelly, either in jail or looking at jail time. Those people were called out and I believe were successfully canceled. Now, a reason that sometimes people have issues with cancel culture is because I've heard some people will say like, oh, well, it's not fair that someone's one mistake defined them, or it's not fair that they made this one mistake and it was blown up because they're a celebrity and blah, 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 blah. Now, for these three men that I listed, I personally, it's just me, and comment below your feelings. I think that if you make a mistake, and it's not just one, it's repeated, but if you make a mistake, even if you just make a mistake or something, and it affects, traumatizes, hurts, belittles a bunch of people, I think that's worth being canceled. For me, and maybe my morality, if somebody does something and it's like, okay, well, they made a one mistake, and it's like, okay, but who was affected? How many people were affected? Who unfortunately did not have the same opportunity because of them, or who unfortunately is traumatized or has to live their entire life differently because of that person's one mistake? So that's personally my reaction and feelings. R. Kelly didn't just make one mistake that one night with one girl, for an example. So I do think with cancel culture, like, there are levels. Like, I do think there are some people who deserve to be canceled and some people who, whatever reason, maybe they don't, maybe they do, who knows. I think a problem that a lot of people have with cancel culture, just videos that I've watched and just things that I've heard, conversations I've had, is that if you have a controversial opinion, or if you said something controversial or something that was derogatory, whatever, either currently or years ago, or when you weren't necessarily thinking there was a camera around, that it's not necessarily fair that that person is canceled. Personally, this is gonna come up a little bit later, I don't feel like there's a lot of people who have successfully been canceled just because they said something controversial or problematic back in the day. Now, what I'm going to talk about later with my guest speakers, and something that I was like, one of my friends told me about, and I was like, you know what, that's probably true, that we believe that only Black women are actually truly canceled or looking at potentially being canceled for having controversial opinions. Now, that's something, again, that's coming a little bit later, so stay tuned. But for the most part, I'm just thinking about people like, for example, Kanye West. We know Kanye West has said things that are controversial. Slavery is a choice. Harriet Tubman didn't really do much. Various things, attacked Black women, all these things. And I do think for Kanye West, his situation is a little different because he has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I'm not going to pretend like I know about bipolar disorder. I don't know if just because someone's bipolar, they would have such stark differences in opinions, especially compared to years ago. And everything that Kanye West was saying years ago versus what he's saying now. But, I think because of his, bipolar disorder, people are kind of like, well, he whatever. But ultimately, he has said things, and he's still making the shoes, Yeezys. He still has the brand. He's still working with Adidas. Like, he's still making music. People are still listening to his music. He is not canceled. He is called out more times than not for things he said, but he is not canceled. And I think there are other people who I can think of just off the top of my head who've said controversial things. T.I., Sabrina Claudio, who has said problematic things from way back versus now. T.I. talk about how he checks his daughter's hymen and things like that to make sure she isn't having sex. they've said controversial things. These controversial things have been called out, but they're still making music. Their music is still being played certain places. And so I just feel like a lot of people have a fear that, oh, well, if I say something or if someone says something controversial, it's not fair that they're being canceled. But in reality, I just do not think that they're actually being canceled, especially if they are male. I noticed, maybe if they're white, maybe if they're do something to redeem themselves, or even if they don't even if they don't, they're not truly canceled. And I mean, in the way that I'm seeing that, like a really intense offender like R. Kelly is canceled for a good reason. So I just think that people need to really think about these things. And I think there needs to be just a shift in how we define when someone's being canceled or when someone is just being called out. I think it's okay to call people out. I think it's okay for some people to be canceled, but I don't think that everyone who gets called out gets canceled. Now, again, comment below. I ultimately think at the end of the day, you're gonna listen to whatever music, you're gonna watch whatever you watch. So, but I'm just saying, I'm like, now, if Adidas dropped Kanye and, no longer was it cool to even say his name, play his music, he lost all of his, he wasn't putting out albums anymore because no record label wanted to work with him or whatever, then I might say, okay, he was canceled because of the things he said. But that's not the case for him. And that's not the case for a lot of people who've just said controversial things. So now I'm just gonna get into the one tip that I have and introduce my guest speakers. So honestly, the tip that I have would just be really make sure when you're talking about call out culture, you define it as call out culture. If you're talking about cancel culture or someone being canceled, make sure you are really talking about someone being canceled. Just because someone is being called out on Twitter or trending or whatever is not necessarily the same thing as them getting canceled. I just think we need to really be careful with these terms, because I think cancel culture can get a bad name, and I do think it's not great in a lot of cases, sometimes. But I also think that for some people who are truly canceled, I'm glad to know that R. Kelly is doing these things. I'm glad to know that Harvey Weinstein is a rapist, and I'm glad to now feel like, okay, I don't want to support them. And I think that people should be able to make that decision based on the things they presented. There might be people who are like, I'm still gonna listen to R. Kelly. That's the thing, everyone can make their own decision, but I just think that it's important that people are called out, and I think it's important for you to make your own decision and have the information to do so. So yeah, my tip would just be really be careful about what it means when someone is called out versus when they are canceled. Now, like I said, cancel culture is a topic that I feel like a lot of people talk about, and I believe sometime last year in my master's program, I'm getting a master's in African American Studies at UCLA, by the way. Check out my welcome to my channel video if you want to know more information about me. But last year, we were talking about cancel culture with a friend of mine, Imani, who will be a guest speaker today. She said something that I was really like, wow, and I literally have thought about it since then. She was just like, I think that Black women are the only people who truly get canceled. And I was like, And I mean, in terms of if we're thinking about the context of just based on things that they've said, in terms of the fact that maybe they said something a long time that was problematic, or currently that was problematic. And so when I told Imani I was doing the video, I was just like, well, I want you to be able to talk about it. I'm like, I don't want you, you're the one who brought it up. And she was like, well, actually, Kayla brought it up, who's another friend of mine who will also be a speaker today. So I invited both of them on my channel. So I'm really excited to have this conversation just about the fact that Black women are potentially actually the ones who get canceled just for saying things that are problematic, or maybe have said things that are problematic in the past. So I'm really excited to get into this conversation. I'm gonna have these lovely ladies introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into it.
I'm Imani.
I'm Kayla.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited. So I know we've had these conversations, but how do we feel about the fact that Black women are usually the only people who are truly canceled when it comes to cancel culture?
Kayla, do you want to start? I mean, there's so much to say, so little and so much has been said about this topic at the same time. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really telling, right? When we think about cancel culture and truly, those who have been canceled, like I can only speak for myself, like off the top of my head, the only person I think who has been like genuinely canceled is probably Azalea Banks, right? And sure, rightfully so. She's wildin' like all the time. But I someone like maybe like Kodak Black or I don't know, XXX or whomever, right? Why is it that Black women are the only ones who seem to be experiencing the kind of wrath of this like mentality of like cancel culture, if it exists? I don't even really know if it exists. But
yeah, I feel like the only person I could think of, which I feel like is the only person for real, where like she was wiped off the face of the earth, is Chrisette Michele. And the only reason I know anything about that is because my mom's demographic listens to her, and I grew up listening to her. But after she performed for Trump, she got dropped from her label. She like experienced all of this like interpersonal like shit, and so it's like I could never imagine some like a similar like person, perhaps not a Black woman, experiencing the kind of like complete and utter like demolition of her career. And that's not to say that like she made like a great choice singing for Trump, because I don't agree with it, and I think I think she should not have done that. But it's telling that like I think something that's really telling is I think her demographic of like 29 to 50-year-old Black women like was really hurt by that, whereas someone like Kanye West, who has a more like racially diverse and younger fan base, is like intrigued by Kanye West like Trump outbursts and things like that. So I don't know if like we can talk about cancel culture without talking about the specific ways that like Black women in general can be less supported by different groups of people, and how because the base is so much smaller, it's more possible for that support to be like sucked away at any moment. So maybe that's like where I'm at.
No, I mean, it's pretty like, I feel like Kanye West and Azalea Banks, like parallel stories, both deal with mental health, both have outbursts, both are out here, Black, commercially successful, right? I mean, 212 in 2012, like that was like everywhere. Like we all know that song. Well, we all knew that song, right?
Yeah.
And so the different ways that like when Kanye West is like on TMZ talking about, oh, Black people, just needed to free themselves from slavery in 2018. And then you have Azalea Banks, I don't know, sacrificing chickens. I don't know, those two things don't really correlate, but you know what I mean? Like these two like events that are happening, and one is like, oh, well, we need to like protect his mental health. It's like watching a train wreck. Like I can't like, see this, like it's too much. Give him your heart, whatever. And then Azalea Banks is like, oh my God, like she's crazy. Like don't talk to her, like don't listen to her, don't give her the same kinds of, care that we give other people. And I think definitely it is rooted, I think, in who we deem as like able to receive care or able to receive, I guess, forgiveness. I've been thinking a lot about that.
Yeah. It feels really like, it's always so interesting because it's like, I've been thinking a lot about this question of cancel culture, because my thing about it is I simply do not no longer want to support people who, for example, believe that like slavery is like a debate of some kind, you know what I mean? Like I don't want to put money into those people's pockets by streaming them any longer, right? And it seems like sometimes, just generally on the topic of cancel culture, it's considered like a personal insult if you decide no longer to stream like R. Kelly or Kanye West. So it's interesting to me then in that way too, that if we're talking about like, if anybody's ever canceled, it's Black women, we are also like specifically saying we don't want to materially support these women anymore, but we're willing to support, like, say, I mean, let's even bring like fucking white men into the picture who like say wild ass shit all the time. We're willing to materially support them consistently, despite like all the shit that they do. So I just think it's really interesting, our relationship to celebrities in general. Like, we're like bound to like support them regardless of what they do, and like we're like expected to do that. And I've been thinking a lot about that, because our whole relationship to celebrity in general is so like a mess at this point.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I was thinking about how there are some people who are, because I personally think that some people are called out, but I don't think there's a lot of people who are truly canceled personally. Like, I'm like, T.I. called out, you know, saying wild things. But I'm like, I feel like if T.I. was at a party, people would still be like, oh, look, there's T.I. If a T.I. song came on, you know, people would be like, oh, this is a good song, blah, blah, blah. So I also, you know, I think it was Kayla's point, like, I'm like, part of me sometimes is just like, is cancel culture really a thing? And is it so much of a thing as we think it is? Like, I just think a lot of people aren't truly canceled. Like, you know, okay, R. Kelly took his music off of Spotify, you know, like, you know, he's in jail, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, these things. I'm like, okay, like, you know, but I'm like, just because I think Black women are the only people who, if we just say something that's controversial, or if something was dug up from years ago, then it's like, okay, they're canceled, they're out, you know. But I just don't think that there's a lot of men, white people, Sabrina, Claudia, who have the same experience.
Yeah. And you know, something that's been making me really uncomfortable with the cancel culture conversation, that feels like just generally like not okay as a comparison, is I've seen people be like, cancel culture is like prison, and like I've seen people make these comparisons.
I was literally about to say, though, I think it is related to carcerality in some ways.
Yeah, I do think it is.
Maybe not prisons, but like the idea of like the carceral, right? Like, what does it look like for us for people to, you know, enact this kind of like carceral like relationship to, I guess, like punishment and justice, right? Because for someone to be canceled, right, like that is a type of justice, right? Like, they did some transgression and now justice is being served by me, you know, enacting these kinds of like carceral logics. So I'll say carcerally, I think it's related, but I'm not gonna be like, oh, we like throw them in jail and cast them outside. You know, it's not, right, definitely not the same in that way. But I think those kinds of logics are what make possible or realistic the fact of the matter that Black women are the ones who, I think, disproportionately, Black women, Black femmes, right, disproportionately are kind of experiencing this canceledness, right? Because if we're going to talk about like intersectionality and whatnot, right, there are more people able to enact carceral logics because they're in a position of power over Black women and Black femmes in certain ways. So I think there's something to be said about carcerality, but I don't know about like the prisons, and I don't know.
Yeah, no, like there's like the common like, it's like canceling your friends is like policing and stuff. And I've heard things. I know it's a lot, but I do agree with you, Kayla, because I do feel like maybe the question is like, what does justice look like, and like, is it possible to do even, you know, towards these like public figures, right? And like, it's the same kind of question of like, maybe analogous to the question of like, I don't think anyone here says that prisons are justice, right? So I think the question just becomes, what does it mean? Like, what do we want from people when they do like bad things? And like, what does it look like for those people to be held accountable? And why is it that so few people are quote unquote held accountable for their actions depending on their identities and their social status? So yeah, like I think it is worth it to at least compare it carcerality, because yeah, it is telling that it really is a very specific group who's, you know, disproportionately impacted by this phenomenon. I don't know. I also thinking about gets very complicated, and like I recently like have had like, I used to be one of those people who was like, yeah, like I don't really believe people should really go to prison, but like if anyone should go, it's like R. Kelly. But now I'm like, I don't think that space can actually do that, whatever it is that would be. And it's very complicated, but you know, as a, you know, I'm not, you know, I didn't survive R. Kelly, but it just makes me wonder. I don't think that this world has what is needed as a solution to that problem. And I don't know like what it would look like. And I also think at the same time, ironically, that R. Kelly actually has not been canceled, right? Like he may be, for all intents and purposes, you know, shut away in a carceral space, right? But like people still like avidly support him, especially in like the era I live in. Like people still play his music, people still go up for him. And so it's interesting too, for like both things to be happening at the same time, where he has like at least some material support, but he is effectively like being like punished in like a really like carceral way. So I'm interested in that thing too, because it's like one thing to be like culturally like still accepted, and then like actually like, I mean not actually, but materially, physically like shut away. So I don't know. It's really hard, because I definitely feel like people's sentiments around R. Kelly are very complicated. But I wanted to say that because that is definitely the elephant in the room, because he is like he is in prison. Like unfortunately, like it's just a really sad story for everyone involved. And
but even in this instance, right, with R. Kelly, Black women are literally, through our focus on like canceling and like through the focus on like we need to like get this justice, like Black women are still, right, the victims are still somehow pushed out of the conversation.
yes,
and so I think like even if not like literally like tangibly like, oh, like Black women, you're canceled, right, these Black women still experience, right, the disproportionately experience the kinds of violence of cancel culture by being like erased from like the, I guess, history or the conversation that we're having. Because I don't think, right, like we can say like R. Kelly, but not everyone can say like, oh, like this is the name of his victim, like this is the name of his victim. So it just sucks all around. Like Black women just are being affected by cancel culture in like every way imaginable.
Yeah, and harassed. I mean, they're harassed. Like when that Surviving R. Kelly documentary came out, I mean, not only imagine being like on Twitter while that was happening, but like I could imagine like the people who were on that documentary like probably experienced like harassment from people who watched it, R. Kelly fans, like that's something else that happens, right? Like if you're not erased, you're being like straight up harassed, or like who knows what else they experienced and continue to experience. So it's a great point. Like every single time we talk about like this, like the reality of like Black women's like erasure and harassment just keeps coming up. So
how do we measure if someone's been canceled? I guess like, is it if nobody ever likes their music? Because then there's still going to be some family members who are like, well, you know, he's, you know, is it if big institutions who have money pull out, which is definitely contributing to white supremacy and capitalism, because that's saying like, well, if you have money, then you're worthy of making someone canceled. Is it, you know, like, is it that they are now a social pariah? So even if you do talk about them, people are still kind of like, like, I don't know. I'm like, what do we think really measures how someone is like totally canceled, or is it kind of like a spectrum? I don't know.
I think when we're talking celebrities, I guess perhaps the way, you know, that we interact with them as popular culture figures, right? Like for instance, Donald Trump, probably until he ran for president, was like one of the most loved men in hip hop, right? Like very much so, like I want to get rich like Donald Trump. I'm trying to make money like Donald Trump. Like this kind of, like, I mean, he was doing awful stuff, but like very much so, like people were like, yeah, like we aspire to like have the same wealth as Donald Trump, like kind of like toting him around in a certain way. To now, right, like you support Donald Trump, like, ooh, like, you know, we don't say his name, like that's, you know, this like kind of shift in public perception of him. I think, obviously it's not gonna be the same, but I think that kind of shift in public perception would be at least one indicator of canceling, right? Like R. Kelly, right? In most spaces, if you're like R. Kelly, people are like, don't do that. But like, is he still making residuals? Is his music still being played, you know, on TV? Does Weird Al Yankovic's weird Trapped in the Closet remixes, like, are those making him money? Like what, you know, those types of questions. I think, I don't know, off the top of my head, one good example is Tory Lanez, right? Kehlani was like, I'm taking you off of my song. And so thinking about the ways, I think Tory Lanez low-key might be on his way to being canceled. Like, I'm not gonna lie. But then you look on the other side of Twitter and people are like, I understand why Tory Lanez did it. And like, oh, like Tory Lanez is setting the precedent for this year. So it's kind of like, you know, I think there's different ways to measure it. But one way I would definitely say to measure it is the ways that, you know, we're interacting with these people in popular culture is one way.
That's a great point, Kayla, you brought up with Tory Lanez, because and even Donald Trump, it feels like there's almost something happening where it's like a bifurcated effect, where it's like there's a maybe it's not like 50-50 or anything, but like one side is like really like, fuck this man, like fuck these people, like if you talk about him, like you're done. And then there's another side that like in some ways has become even more supportive of him, even more maybe than they ever even were before the incidents as such. So it makes me think that like in some situations, there's like very, like, again, I don't even know if these people are ever actually canceled in the sense of like no one knows them, no one likes them, no one listens to them. Like there's always going to be like a group, which I think Tory Lanez is a great example of, that's like very much in support. It might be a smaller group than like he had before, but like, yeah, like it makes me think like there's like two different, or maybe three different or something, but like two different like sides of it, where it's like one side thinks something completely different than the other. And it's like, how do you navigate that? Because I have no idea like what that means in the context of cancel culture, but it's interesting.
Any last like sentiments or just personal feelings that you have about, you know, certain things? I feel like at the end of the day, listen to who you want to listen to, but you know, stay aware. And it personally, it rubs me the wrong way if I know the person who I'm listening to is a rapist or a predator or just racist or, you know, sexist or things like that. That's personally me though, but yeah, I don't know if either of you have any last little sentiments about that.
Abolish celebrity. I'm done. Like, just abolish it. I don't think that, unfortunately, because of how do we even start to talk about celebrity, but like because of how white supremacist celebrity itself is, it almost, the reason why like they're always doing shitty shit is because to be a celebrity is to do shitty shit. So abolish it. Like, and whatever that means, I think people are starting to like think about that. I think people have always thought about it, but I think that category, I think the way we like uphold people, I think it just has to go. So the cancel culture conversation, I think, will look really different once we stop like idolizing certain people. So hopefully in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I would just say to Imani's point, is if we are to start taking something serious like abolition, like if we're to really think about abolition, right? Because it's like a pretty like hot topic right now. So if we're gonna talk about abolition of the police, abolition of prisons, abolition of whatever, right? I think we also need to then take into consideration the way that we're interacting with cancel culture, and those types of questions. I think we need to think about what we, at the root of cancel culture, at the root of abolition, right? It's a question of justice. I think we need to really interrogate what we think about justice and accountability and you know, move in new ways that rely on different types of, you know, praxis. And read more Christina. Like, not to tell people to read books, but I think that, you know, if I were to give anyone any piece of advice ever to think about cancel culture, is to read Christina Sharp's kind of talking about justice, and then kind of think from there.
Thank you, Aziza.
Good resource.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kayla and Imani, for such an insightful, incredible conversation. Thank you so much for watching. That's all I have for you today, folks. Tune in for my next video. I post every other week on Sundays. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the subscribe button down below. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified every time I post. Don't forget, ever, that Black knowledge is Black power, and I will see you soon.